Hello there and welcome to Mental Health Monday. Today I'm going to be talking about triggers. Why, you might ask, would I be talking about triggers on a Mental Health Monday myths video? Well, there is a rising trend that concerns me around the word triggers and the word triggered. And that is the use of the word triggered and the use of the word triggers to indicate possibly distressing or upsetting or emotionally taxing things in books or movies or whatever. I think that we need to re-educate people on what a trigger is. I feel like it's been co-opted by a group of people who want to be shielded from everything in the world. And whilst I respect your decision, I resent your appropriation of the words triggered and triggers, or trigger, to speak about those possibly upsetting things. The use of the word triggered and triggers and trigger in place of upset, distressed, emotionally taxed, made anxious by, is diluting and needlessly reducing the importance of the reason why the word triggered is used in mental illness and PTSD, etc. Triggers come in two types, external and internal. As someone who has complex PTSD, I can assure you that the vast majority of triggers are internal. They are memories, bodily sensations, feelings of anxiousness, feelings that you associate with memories, sensations that you associate with memories. You cannot predict when they are going to happen. Guaranteed, you cannot predict the existence of an internal trigger. But the same applies to external triggers. Whilst there are situations in the outside world that I am aware will trigger me, I cannot always avoid them. And there are certain situations, certain external triggers that I have two choices about. Either I can encounter that trigger and experience it in one way, or walk away from that trigger and experience it in another way. What I'm saying is that there are certain situations, certain external triggers, that you're damned if you do and damned if you don't avoid them. You will have a triggered response to them, whether you go through them or whether you avoid them. Because triggers are not logical. That is the main thing about triggers. Whether they are internal or whether they are external, triggers are not logical, they are not predictable. There is no real way of avoiding them. It's not as convenient, basically, as saying, I'm not going to read this or I'm not going to watch this because I might be triggered. And that's just the beginning of it all. So external triggers and internal triggers are neither predictable nor always avoidable. And sometimes to avoid them is to be triggered in a completely different way. So you have to decide whether you want to be triggered by exposing yourself to that situation or by walking away from it. There is no logical reasoning behind a trigger. It is a bodily or mental reaction to a past trauma that affects you in the present, and there's no way to avoid that because there is no way to predict when memory will be triggered. There is no way to predict your emotional response to it. There is no way to predict whether responding to it or not responding to it is going to be worse. So that's the first thing. Secondly, we've already been through what we've been through. We don't have any choice with our triggers. It's already happened. The worst has happened and we are suffering from it. And to use the words that describe our strong emotional, mental, physical reactions to things that trigger memories of those events for your possible upset, I think you can see how it might not be helpful or useful in any way, especially not for those of us who have already been through what we've been through and don't have any choice in our responses to it, have no means to avoid those responses. So the reason why I am talking about triggers in a Mental Health Monday Myths video is because I hope it starts a conversation about how we can talk in ways that don't diminish what people are suffering, because people will always associate the lowest common denominator with something. You know, this is how stigma starts. when you start using the word triggered because you're going to be upset by a scene in a book that you haven't even read. When you come across as someone who's just unwilling to be upset by anything, people then associate someone who's genuinely triggered because of a past mental trauma with just not wanting to read an upsetting thing or see an upsetting thing. Then it becomes less, it becomes diminished, and people look down on it more. And people look down on mental illness enough anyway. We have enough stigma to be dealing with without those terms becoming associated with something that they are not anything to do with. So, yeah, I would urge you to change the way you talk and change the way you think in respect of that, and in understanding that that is how things work in the world. If something is used for the wrong thing, people tend to always seek the lowest common denominator, because dealing with actual stress and actual trauma and actual pain is far too difficult, and it's much easier to say, oh, you're just one of those people that's upset by nothing, aren't you? And yeah, I understand that you're not upset by nothing. I understand that the things that upset you. I certainly would not diminish your right to be upset by something, or your right to say that you're upset by something, and I would ask that you in turn do not diminish a term that is used to describe something that I cannot avoid and other people like me can't avoid. It is a very specific medical term to describe something that happens within people who have been through trauma and have suffered significant damage from it. And I don't think that the two uses are equal in any sense. If you're going to be upset by something, please just consider saying, it's going to upset me and I don't want to read it. You don't have to make out like it's going to trigger you if it's not going to. And I can assure you, most of the time, 100%, I can pretty much guarantee that if you're a person who suffers from triggers because of PTSD or whatever, you cannot predict what might trigger you. So you won't be able to say with any certainty, this book, this thing, this situation will upset me. So we generally don't. So we generally know when people are saying that they're going to be triggered, that they're not someone who is triggerable in that sense, that they're just using it to describe what might become emotionally distressing for them, and that's not the same thing. To be triggered is to be slightly more than emotionally distressed. Triggers can actually make PTSD worse, because they really are that bad. And yeah, that's all I really have to say on the matter. So yeah, I hope that was educational. Thank you for watching. Bye bye.